Cool. So, is your name pronounced Neeraja?
Neeraja?
Neerja? Cool.
Neeraja Desphande.
Okay. Um, and you're on the East Coast in the DC area, right?
I'm in Boston, actually.
Oh, Boston. Yeah. So you work with the Independent Women's Forum,
hmm
and you've written for Pirate Wires as well as
Yep.
the Free Press, I believe.
Yeah, I used to work at the Free Press. So.
Okay. Yeah. So,
Yeah,
what's your
IWF doesn't have an office, so I'm currently sort of nomadic, but my home is Boston.
you say Free Press is the one that doesn't have an office?
IWF doesn't have an
Oh,
office.
IWS doesn't.
So
Oh,
we have a completely virtual office, yeah. So
oh.
we're spread across the country actually.
Okay, that's funny. If I were to guess which one of those outlets didn't have an office, I would think Pirate Wires because it's so tech
I don't think
or
Pirate Wires has an office though.
yeah,
So,
in,
because but I'm not. I mean, I'm just a contributing writer there. So I write occasionally, like
yeah,
not as like a full time thing.
yeah. I
IWF.
subscribed to them for a bit, and then I had to sort of curtail or scale back. All those subscriptions started getting pricey, but
Yeah.
they do pretty good stuff. Um, so what's your sort of general orientation as far as politics goes, and what where are you basically coming from? I'll tell you
I'm
I'm from
coming.
center right just to be fair and put that out there. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm basically center right myself. I mean, I Alana Newhouse, who's the editor in chief of Tablet magazine, so she wrote a couple of years ago that the real political divide in America isn't between the right and the left; it's between those who think everything is broken and needs to be built fresh, and people who don't think everything is broken. And so I consider myself a brokenist per Alana Newhouse's sort of dichotomy there. But I'm center right. I mean, in the political sense, I work
Yeah.
at a center right think tank, and I'm a Republican. I feel like a normie Republican. I'm technically not registered Republican, but
Yeah.
I'm.
Yeah, I'm not. I'm not. I haven't even. Nor am I. Not only am I not registered, I haven't even voted since 2008. Um,
I'm a
so
registered. I register unenrolled because in the Boston area, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to be a registered Republican. The primaries
right.
are all, they're fought between Democrats, so you might as well
Um,
register unenrolled.
I suppose there might be some more local politics where it makes sense to not even. Well, you can
The
vote
Mass
on an initiative, right?
GOP. Well, so part of it is what I've heard. I've heard sort of conflicting things. One, which is that you should, if you're a Republican in the Democratic area and the GOP is doing nothing, which in this case it's doing nothing, you should just register unenrolled because if there is a big GOP primary, you can vote for it. But if there isn't, then you can just vote for the Democrats, like within the Democratic primaries and choose the less crazy one. So that's one argument I've heard. Another one I've heard is that when the GOP sees its voter ranks increasing, they tend to invest more. So there's some sense that if more people registered Republican, the Mass GOP would invest more. But I don't really buy that nearly as much because that's like you should be competitive regardless if I think the GOP here has just not really, I don't.
Yeah, I have a hard time thinking of anywhere where any sort of major metro area where the GOP is truly on top, except for suppose DC right now, and then maybe Miami. I mean,
Mhm.
it's really all about the Democrats in any kind of major city. Um,
Yeah.
of course, now one might counter that, well, DC is extremely consequential major city, and that has effects for all these other major cities throughout the country. But I tend to think that Democrats and what they want to get is still fairly autonomous, and of course, you can basically thank federalism for that. Um, and that kind of gets me to an interesting point where I think that the concern over states' rights has largely flipped in the Trump years, with Trump representing a much more muscular, to hell with federalism. Let's lean into executive power, executive reach across the country and around the world. Um, and the Democrats are sort of finding this, or have a newfound appreciation for states' rights, be it a Colorado judge who wants to have an effect on the national elections or anything else, or a Wisconsin judge, um, abiding by her conscience in her mind. Um, so yeah, what? What you said a moment ago, the difference might be between people who believe the system is broken and people who don't. That's the primary sort of wedge now. Um, I think conservatives do have a better claim to be more down on the current moment, without getting into specifics. They are more legitimately pessimistic and in a kind of revolutionary mood. Um, why do you think that is? Why do you think they've sort of switched places here, left and right, as far as a need for massive reform, right? Somehow, in some way.
The left just became the establishment, right? So at some point, the revolution was complete, and when the revolution is complete, you do become the establishment, right? You don't get to say, oh, like, Lenin might have been a revolutionary in 1917. He wasn't by the time of his death, really, and Stalin certainly wasn't a revolutionary, right? So you look at that sort of thing, and you see that, okay, well, at some point, and beyond Stalin, I mean Brezhnev and all these sorts of other, sort of leaders when the Soviet Union was stagnating, those people were certainly not revolutionaries, right? So, sort of thinking about that, what happens here is that, yeah, like, Democrats were genuine revolutionaries for a really long time. Some of the things they accomplished were arguably great. I think civil rights is obviously, I mean, it's become this big hot topic these days. But I mean, in terms of desegregation, in terms of genuine civil rights, I think Democrats really did do a lot. I think they built a lot of great cities. I think liberals made a lot of great art. I don't think it's all bad, right? I think Republicans have screwed up nearly as much, if not, nearly as much, I would say. Over, like, you could it all sort of balances out in my mind. Who's screwed up more and who screwed up less, I don't really care about. But yeah, I mean both parties have made mistakes, both sort of coalitions have made mistakes, but I think eventually, on the social revolution, Democrats went too far, and they also got boring.
Yeah.
So now I think it's sort of Republicans who have the bohemians, right? There's no way to really be a
Yeah.
bohemian, if being a bohemian is the status quo. So the Republicans are the bohemians, the Republicans are the weirdos, the Republicans are sort of the counterculture types, just because that's literally the only subversive thing you can do in this moment. So,
Yeah, and
I see it. Yeah.
I think what's what's sort of odd is that part of what makes the Republicans seem sort of outrageous now is this, from what I can tell, at least a lot of the thinkers that I know of, is a sincere attempt to return to the original Civil Rights Act. Which
Mhm.
in its original formation, it was very much colorblind, and now they're militants about getting back to that. And so it is interesting how that shows that it over time, at least in certainly my lifetime and in the second half of the 20th century, it's been Democrats who are the idea introducers, and then conservatives lag in many cases, and that's something that the harder right tends to criticize more people on the center right, like myself and yourself, that we're just playing catch up with Democrats. And to that I say, okay, yeah, that's fine. I mean, I don't need, I'm not trying to go way back to first principles like some kind of neo-reactionary. And so that means
Mhm.
sticking up for women's sports, not going all the way back to just you know dissing the idea of women's sports to begin with, right? Now it's much of the center right is about defending women's sports and defending the original formulation of the Civil Rights Act, and I find that interesting, right?
Just right, those acts, those civil rights measures, they're really about fairness. They're not about, you know, they're not. I mean, of course, they have been used by revolutionaries. Of course, many of the people crafting them were arguably revolutionary. Of course, they came with unwanted, bad side effects. But I think I think the sort of hard right sense that we can just get rid of those things is, first of all, silly. Like, I just find it to be a complete non-starter. You're not going to get people to agree with that. You're not going to get people to really want to buy into that. And I think even people who are ostensibly on the hard right aren't especially, like they're just not they're not serious, I think, when they say, "Oh, let's just gut the Civil Rights Act," right? That's not like that's just not a serious that's not a serious practical thing. If it theoretically, like maybe, right? But even theoretically, I don't think they want that because if you got the Civil Rights Act, right, you can't do any of what Trump is doing right now. If you got Title IX, you can't. You have no claim to protecting women's sports. You have no claim to protecting women's prisons. You have no claim to protecting women's locker rooms. So I think a lot of these things, like why can't we use the institutions and the tools that we have instead of just saying, oh, it was better before they existed. So I tend to think, I mean, in that case, I guess maybe I'm making a slightly less brokenist claim than than I sort of started off by
Yeah.
making. But there are certain things I would not say everything, right? So I think, for instance, getting rid of the Department of Education is a great idea. But when it comes to civil rights measures, I do think that's more of a we should use this to establish fairness rather than saying it's completely rigged and we should burn it down. I'm not a burn it down person.
Yeah, it's funny when we say things like, brokenist or not, there's kind of an unsaid time period in which we're claiming things have gotten broken. We're not saying it's been broken for 300 years, you know,
Mhm.
like some of the far right um, neo-reactionaries. Yeah, I think the farther right, I don't think they're. I mean, if they could snap their finger and make the Civil Rights Act go away, they probably would. But I think they sort of moved on from that, almost like kind of proto-Reaganite Barry Goldwater style politics. I think if anything, they want to use, yeah, like you mentioned, Trump is leaning on Civil Rights Act, in going after Harvard and stuff like that, right? You're supposed to be colorblind, right? So, they would, if anything, they would probably latch on to an interpretation of the Civil Rights Act that would, especially given subsequent kind of revisions that started to sneak back in color preference, all that, something like that, but for white people. So they're like, well, I don't want to do the Civil Rights Act because we're going to need it to carve out our own little identity politics, piece of the universe, right? And I think you see that with some of the post-liberal people on the right who are sort of indifferent actually to America's like founding documents, to legislation. They're more willing to, use legislation creatively to get the outcomes they want, which they think what Democrats have been doing for decades. And I think that's largely true. I think a lot of the conservatives have been sort of glued to an originalism, um, not trying like a sneaky lawyer to finagle something out of those documents that they want, even if it's fairly plainly at odds, right? Um, so yeah, I think of the post liberals, if anything, would just they're not necessarily trying to scrap the Civil Rights Act. They want all the tools at their disposal. Yeah,
That's what Trump is doing, right? So what I would say is that I guess it's also hard with labels because I don't even know what like who we're talking about. But there are the people on the right or like the new right who are saying, well, Trump is doing exactly what we should be doing, which is going after every sort of institution that's led to chaos in this
yeah,
country, right? Just broadly defined chaos. Everyone knows what I'm talking about. Not just woke, but just general deterioration. Um eh, that's I think that's where sort of I actually I do agree. If that's what we're calling the far right, then I do tend to agree. I think that there's another segment of the right that says, you know going after these people with their own tools, right? Going like the civil rights measures all belong to Democrats, right? They're not ours. We should just not use them. We should just tear them down. But that's a non-starter. You can't start with a non-starter. So I see it as I do think using being being willing to win, right? I mean, I think this is again this is a place where I sort of diverge from. I was for a while a never Trumper. I registered Democrat because I couldn't stand Trump that much. I was not. I mean, I'm 24, so I'm not like I haven't been
yeah,
voting for very long,
yeah.
but
I'm significantly older, so some of the things I might mention, maybe you're not aware of, but so I'll try to stay a bit more current here.
no, it's okay. It's okay. I mean, I would say I can figure it out.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think one thing I've sort of thought about in the past 10-ish years, I've sort of seen these things unfold, first as like a teenager and then as an adult, and sort of seeing,
Yeah,
the
you've been
general.
your entire political career thus far has been consumed by Trump, essentially.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I like high school Trump, college Trump, and now my adult. Like it's kind of funny if you think about it, and you think about people who are even younger than me, like 4 or 5 years younger, and it's like they basically probably don't remember a president who wasn't Trump,
Yeah.
right? It's always just sort of been Trump. But I mean, that aside, so oh, wait, what was I totally lost my train of thought.
Um,
Voting. Oh, I mean, I started off as like a sort of never Trumper. I feel like when I was
right.
in high school, I felt very strongly aligned with people like David French, Jonah Goldberg. I used to read those a lot. And then I was just sort of disgusted by Trump. I didn't like him. I think it was actually 2021, the vaccine mandates that really shifted me over. I was like, this is ridiculous. And Biden, whom I'd voted for, I think within like a couple of months turned out to be governing like a radical crazy person. And I think that was also shocking and jarring and not something I looked upon. That's not something I'd really expected. Like there were things I think Biden could have gotten away with in my book. What the way he went about it was just crazy, and I guess he wasn't all there at that point. He was probably senile, you know.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit of a different it's a little bit of a different problem. But what I would say is that I sort of came around to the Trump movement, mostly because of the vaccine mandates and mostly because I think you see the sort of National Review crew. I mean, not the National Review these days. I guess the old National Review. I would say maybe more the
Yeah.
Dispatch. Maybe that idea. I respect those people a lot. To be honest, I really find them. I think I'm glad they exist. I guess just intellectually, I'm
Yeah.
glad they exist. I'm glad not everyone feels the same way that I feel. But personally, where I break from them is that I think that they're a little bit allergic to winning, and I think that they think that having principles means never winning. And I just disagree with that. I don't think having principles means you can't go after universities like Harvard or Columbia that have really, I think decimated the fabric of society in a lot of ways. I don't think you can say, oh, it's norms, procedures when norms and procedures have been weaponized against us, right? Like again, weaponized against normal
Yeah.
people. It's my cat buddy.
Yeah. Uh,
um,
yeah. They're what a paleoconservative writer named Sam Francis once called beautiful losers, right?
mhm,
They want to be eloquent and not scrap, and it's sort of like decorum above all, you know. Um,
yeah.
yeah, I think that yeah, I've become a little bit post-liberal in the sense of not caring as much about the letter of the law and indeed trying to get what you can within the bounds of lawyerly reason. And I think that the Republicans, because they are not the party of lawyers, Democrats are much more that. Um, they need to start figuring out how to cleverly use the law to get what they want as well. I think certain like basic things like free speech should not be tinkered with in such a sinister way. But a lot of other laws I'm okay with tinkering with. Um, and
Yeah, I would say it's not even tinkering necessarily. That's part of my general sense of it.
they
It's
need a
that
greater legal imagination, just like the left has had, essentially.
well, that's sort of how I see it, and not only that. I mean, I think their interpretation for many many years of the law has literally been, we can't win. The law, like principles means losing.
Yeah,
And like I think it's literally like it's not even I don't even think that's the necessarily even the most honest interpretation of the law. I think that's actually an evasion of responsibility. That's an
yeah,
evasion of your own principles, right? Because if your principles only exist in the ether, they only exist as, oh, these are shiny ideals and we can never actually work toward them. It's like, wait, what are we
yeah.
even talking about then? Like, why are we even bothering doing this?
Yeah. I'm not lawyerly enough to have a lot of
Yeah, me
strong
neither.
case law or anything to rely on as an example of what I mean, but I think of the commerce. Act or the Commerce Clause, or I remember something I think in the 30s. It was some sort of creative legal interpretation of the Commerce Clause that decided someone growing their own corn, not for sale at all, since that affected the market, it was meant to be regulated like any other kind of commercial transaction. Now, I mean, on its face, how could that be? But they got away with it, and now we live with it to this day. And hey, that's a very banal example, only involving a corn and trade. But I think the right should try to figure out how to do things like that to advance a more conservative agenda. And on that, I only mean like the hard right laughs at conservatives who just want to be 90s Democrats. But yeah, that's more or less kind of where I'm at. Not 90s campus Democrats, but you know, um, so it would be a
Don't
kind of
think.
maybe. Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, no, sorry, continue.
Oh, yeah. I kind of get in over my skis by saying, oh yeah, greater legal imagination. Ooh, nice term, legal imagination. But I can't actually give any real concrete examples of what that's supposed to look like. But yeah, I think they ought to do that.
So it's that like the 90s Democrat thing, for instance, right? I
Yeah,
get why people say, "Oh, we can't just be 90s Democrats. We can't just be 90s Democrats." But you also have to work within the constraints of what you have, not within the constraints of what you wish you had,
yeah,
right? You're not unlimited. You're not like there is such a thing as thinking too big. I think for years and years until Trump really, conservatives weren't thinking big enough, right? But now it's like there is such a thing as thinking too big and thinking in terms of things that people don't really want to go back to, right? So I'll often hear conservatives saying, "Oh, well, we need to ban no fault divorce," and it's like,
yeah.
I think divorce is bad. I don't think divorce is ideal, but like just in terms of like people's realities, people's
Yeah,
lives,
that's
it,
completely dead in the water. That's something like that is so dead in the water. I mean, wives and families that are highly functioning would be appalled by that. Okay? Wives who don't want
exactly.
to get divorced would be appalled by that. So just knock it off. Don't even talk about stuff like that.
Exactly. And the problem is if okay, so if we're returning to a fault divorce framework, right? So you have to prove fault. Then it's like, okay, you want people to have to prove things like like the intricate details of their marriages and potentially have those records online, and all these
Yeah,
sorts of things that are like the non-starter, right? So it's like, okay, we can say, oh, this divorce is bad, and so the solution is just banning it. It's like that. This is not how it works, right? And I feel the same way about all the trad stuff at this point. I would say I'm pretty socially conservative, but I find the trad stuff just so ridiculous at this point because I'm like, it's living outside of reality, right? It's
yeah,
living outside of anyone's sort of experience of the world. And there's a difference between saying, okay, like it might be nice if, like it'd probably be better if, for instance, like, women didn't have to put their kids 40 hours a week in daycare immediately. Like, if we had more sane expectations for moms, if we normalize taking a few years off when the kids are young, there's a difference between saying that and saying just women shouldn't work,
yeah,
right? Or saying in an age with hybrid careers and part-time, like again, you can think
yeah,
creatively, right? Without saying women shouldn't work is actually a very narrow way of looking at things. Instead, you could say, okay, well, we should encourage hybrid jobs or remote jobs as an alternative for women who are like mothers. They get that as a benefit, right? Let's say, like, if employers started offering that as a benefit, I'm sure that's the sort of thing that
yeah.
could
Yeah,
potentially
just
really
to interject real quick,
incentivize
yeah, something
that.
like something like remote work, that's a lot of conservatives weren't thinking very clearly on that. They associate that with a bunch of the Democrat aligned laptop class, and they don't want to get their hands
Mhm,
dirty and actually come into work. They want to be lazy, right? And they don't think of the way in which remote work it helps with two income families, maybe one income. And the point is, it keeps you relative to the what would exist otherwise at home and around your kids.
mhm.
And but the partisan brain just kind of dumps on that, and they don't see through to the ramifications of remote work in that way. That's just one example, right, of what you're talking about.
That's exactly right, and I don't think remote work, I mean, I work completely remotely, but I don't think remote work is optimal for all people or for all jobs, but I can imagine a world in which employers say, "Okay, everybody comes in the office, but moms with children under 5 can work remotely." Right? And that's a benefit, right? That's not something that's like like maternity leave in a lot of jobs is a benefit, right? Paid time off is a benefit. We have all sorts of benefits. Why can't remote work be one of them? Why
Yeah,
can't, why can't we think a little bit like why can't we have more part-time jobs? Why can't we have more opportunities for women who have young children but don't want to put their kids in daycare for 40 hours a week, but also don't want to necessarily be full-time stay-at-home moms? Like there's a wider, more expansive way of thinking about this as I see it. And I
yeah,
think it's like we're limited by some of these, you know, like by just ideologies basically, right? I think anytime something turns from an idea to an ideology is like, that's when we sort of fall off the cliff, and
yeah.
that's what happened to Democrats.
Yeah, Jordan Peterson used to sort of dump on ideologies, and too many people are ideological. Um, I'm not really. I just mentioned him saying that because he said it, and maybe you remember him saying that, and people remember him saying that. I'm not going to talk about Jordan Peterson after this, but I've started to sort of appreciate some measure of ideology because it helps to kind of bring together disparate parts of your sort of the societal agenda you see in your head, and it can help you actually become not fall into a trap of say cult of personality like some of the people around Trump, frankly. Um, and on Trump, uh, I've become something like a never Trumper only this time though, only in this administration, and it's for the most boring reasons ever: trade, you know, economics, and I'm enough of an older business conservative to find that appalling, and his cockiness on it pisses me off. Uh, so I'm kind of I'm not like a vocal never Trumper.
That's how it all play out. I'm not
Right. We
I
still have
don't
to see how
feel
it plays out.
definitive one way or the other, but what I will say is what I've found, I mean, Trump aside, what I found more appalling are like the MAGA influencers online who are like, you don't need to like they're saying the same, like we just need a reset. And it's like, okay, great. I was here like 4 or 5 years ago when we were all freaking out about the Great Reset, right? Like, and the liberals were wanting a great reset on society. And so we're saying the same thing, but like make it based. Like this is ridiculous. So I don't I don't again, like I'm not sure what exactly the calculations are about the trade stuff, the tariff stuff. Like I tend to support free trade. I tend to think that we we benefit from free trade, but we also need domestic manufacturing. Like I think, I'm in some middle position there. I'm not totally sure where this is going, and
Yeah.
I'd be lying if I said I didn't have my concerns. I do have my concerns. I'd also be lying if I said part of me wasn't like, okay, great, let's see what happens, because I do really feel both ways about this.
Yeah. I'm not against certain like strategic tariffs aimed at China on like advanced chips. We've always had stuff like that. But this kind of shotgun approach that seems to it ensnares everything from Canadian food and Canadian drink, Mexican drink and food, baby carriages, machine parts. I mean, it's just you coming from Europe, coming from elsewhere in the world, not China, parts of the global South. I mean, it's just there really is no design there. It's just he's just playing whack-a-mole with his sentiments. But weirdly, he has always talked a lot about tariffs. He didn't do this in the first administration, but he's on record talking about this consistently in a way he's not on other things. So maybe it's on me for not seeing it coming.
Yeah, I'm taking the wait and see approach to this. I really am,
Mhm.
and I don't I don't feel like I think in general I'm like also looking at the markets, right? I mean, if you believe that markets are more or less efficient, and I think they're probably more or less efficient. They're like literally the accumulation of human rational thinking, right? So if you think about markets as being mostly efficient, with caveats, and you look at the stock market, like there isn't, I mean, I'm knocking on wood right now, but there isn't the sort of reaction you would see from people freaking out